As we move on to Middle America, same similar learning objectives, so looking at those geographic features, talking about all the different important features. We'll focus a lot more on the different physical features in this region than we have in the others, and how those impact agriculture and where people settle, as well as the human geography prior to colonization. And then also just looking at some of the patterns with that colonial development that have been seen. All right, so just a little bit about this area and what Middle America is made up of. So mainly Mexico is what we think of, and sometimes it's lumped in with North America. Our text, though, puts it in with Middle or Central America. And then you have many smaller countries like Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Panama, as well as some of the Caribbean islands as well, like Cuba, the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, Haiti, etc. So all of these come together to make up Central America. And just a video here that kind of explores some of those physical features and some of what this area has to offer. So again, spending a good bit of time here talking about the physical features. So first of all, Panama is an isthmus, so that's kind of a geological term here, but it essentially is the dividing line between the North and South America. Just kind of by definition, an isthmus is a narrow strip of land that has water on either side. So we'll talk, or of course you probably heard about the Panama Canal, which actually links the Pacific and the Atlantic oceans. But because this land is so thin, it allowed that canal to be made so that it could bridge the gap between those two oceans. So the other features, there are actually quite a few mountains. We may not typically think about Middle and Central America as being very mountainous, but it actually is very mountainous. Many different ranges that we'll kind of see, but the Sierra Madre Occidental, which is the western side of, or the western mother range, and then others kind of branch off from that. Then we also have the Sierra Madre Oriental, and that's the eastern mother ridge. So again, you can see them here. So again, the Sierra Madre Occidental on our west side, and then that Oriental on the eastern side. But again, then many other mountains kind of come off of those to make this very mountainous terrain. All right, so if we start on some of these physical features, so first of all, Lake Nicaragua. It's the largest lake in Middle America. It's very close, as you can see here, to the Pacific Ocean, so just a small narrow strip of land there that separates it. But even though it's that close to the Pacific Ocean, it actually drains into the Atlantic. It has about 400 islands. You can see a few of them, definitely not 400, but you can see there are many, many islands, and this includes a lot of volcanic islands that are found within this lake. Again, I mentioned the Panama Canal. So this was a man-made canal. It's about 50 miles long. And again, its job is to connect the, let me just get rid of these. So its job is to connect the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. So right in here is that canal. Again, some of it was naturally made, and then, but again, it was completed to allow that connection by men or women. But again, this is a man-made canal. It's not natural. It does have a very complex geological setting. Again, remember, most of the activity that we see is at the plate borders. And what happens here, and what we can see, is that here around we have the Caribbean plate, we have the Costa Rica plate, we have the Nausicaa plate. Further south, we have the Antarctic. But again, we have a lot of these plate boundaries that come together over this Middle America area. So that's going to give rise to lots and lots of geological activity. So many, many volcanoes occurring that create some of those islands, but also cause a lot of devastation. Earthquakes are very, very common, and unfortunately, quite a few of them have really impacted the economy of this region. So for example, in 2010, an earthquake in Haiti was a 7.0 magnitude, and over 100,000 individuals died during that earthquake. Many of those Caribbean islands, again, we also have the Caribbean plate, there are tectonically active. The islands are large, actually underwater mountain ranges that just happen to stick up out into the above the water to create that land. So again, most of them, let me get rid of our old. All right, now we can clean this up a little bit. But again, you can see these ocean mountains that actually come up, and this is what forms the land masses that form a lot of those Caribbean islands. Also here in this region, we talk about altitudinal zonation, and this is not just something that happens in Central and Middle America, but this is something we can see in a lot of different areas that have a range in elevation. So again, because this area is so mountainous, we have what is referred to as this altitudinal zonation. And it's, so terria refers to land. So you have the Terria Calenete. So this is kind of the sea level. This is going to be the lowest elevation. So this is more of our tropical rainforest that we'll see. The Tierra Templada, this is moving up between 25 and 6,000, 2,500 to 6,000 feet. This is where most people are going to live. Again, it's high enough away from, activity along the ocean, but also has a lot of agricultural use to support and lots of resources to support that human population. Then as we keep traveling up between 6,000 and 12,000 feet, we have the Terria Freya, and this is actually the highest zone in Central America. So we will mention the other two, but this is as high as we go in Central America. But this is where some of the grazing animals and resources would be, as well as some crops that prefer higher elevations and cooler climates. But just to kind of finish this out again, some other regions though may also have the Terria Helada and the Nevada. And so this is going to be between 12,000 and 15,000, and then greater than 15,000, which would be our snow line that we have. So first, looking at the Tierra Caliente. So again, this is the hot land. So this is what we think about, especially with the Caribbean islands. So kind of island weather. We have lots of palm trees here. Again, lots of right along the ocean. It's right by the sea level. So maybe in some lighthouses. But again, as far as like agriculture, not a lot. A little bit too hot in this area typically. Then the Templada. So this is more that temperate land. Again, this is where we're going to see a lot of people. So most of the cities and most of the people are going to live in this zone. So we see some elevation, we see some mountains, but that can provide, again, resources, agriculture to support those, as well as it's not quite as hot as right along the coast. Mexico City, for example, is part of this in that Templada, which is the largest city in this region, but its elevation is about 7,000 feet. Then moving on to the Fria, so this is the cold lands, and again, this is kind of, again, approximately the highest zone here. This is going to be, again, that kind of grazing animals, potatoes and barley, as well as dairy operations. Again, our Helada, so this is kind of the frost land, so we think more about like alpacas and llamas that are able to survive in these higher elevations, kind of, again, just grazing. Not a lot of trees here, again, typically very cold, so organisms need to be cold resistant. And then, of course, Nevada being the very, very top, but again, it doesn't get that high in this region. All right, so now switching into our human geography here in the Maya civilization is kind of where we're going to start. So this is around 2000 BC, and it lasted until 900 AD or CE. Those two terms are used interchangeably. So this civilization was about 3,000 years, and in terms of civilizations, that's a very, very long time. So these are the indigenous groups. They immigrated in from North America. It encompassed about 1 million people at its height. It's not exactly sure what led to the downfall around 900 CE or AD, But again, at that point, again, we don't really think about 1 million people as that many, but at this time frame, that was a huge civilization and population. This Mayan civilization is known for its architecture, so we see some examples over here to the right. Sophisticated writing system, math actually kind of being introduced by the Mayans, but then also agriculture and forestry. So they were able to be very successful because of these resources and these abilities. Then after the Mayans, the Aztecs, this civilization became more popular or populated around 15th century AD. So this was west and north of the Mayan Empire. It centered around what today is Mexico City, so Tenochtitlan. Probably butchered that, sorry. But again, it kind of centered around, and that's why Mexico City is so large. This was kind of one of the main civilizations that led to that present-day Mexico City. So around 100 to 200,000 residents, and never reached quite the height of the Mayan civilization. The largest European cities, though, during the time, just to kind of put it in perspective, so Paris and London had about 400,000. So not quite that big, but definitely a large population. And they were mainly known for their art. So a couple examples shown over here to the right. Now we do know the fall of the Aztecs was due to Spanish conquistadors like Hernando Cortez. So in 1520, that is what led to the destruction and essentially annihilation of the Aztec people. Again, unsure about the Mayans, but do know about the Aztecs. And then just kind of wrapping up here, talking about the European colonization. So we mentioned before, at some point or another, Europe has kind of been colonized about all parts of the world. So if we look at this, so about the 1600s, so again, kind of annihilated there, the Aztecs. So the Europeans and enslaved Africans were shipped to this new world, and that was actually more into Central America. We usually think about North America, but actually this colonization actually was more in Central America. So about 90% of African slaves were actually sent to the Caribbean or South America, and then unfortunately, of course, made their way to North America. So the rimland, so we have the mainland, which is everything connected between North and South America, but then the rimland would be all of the islands and the Caribbean islands. So that rimland, just due to its proximity, was actually colonized first. So it includes those Caribbean islands. The agriculture at that point shifted from subsistence to plantations, and that's what led to the need for slaves. Was again, the Mayans and the natives were just farming to support themselves. The colonization, though, was trying to make a profit, so mass producing crops and vegetation. So this is mainly an African population today due to that huge population of African slaves that were brought to this area. Now the mainland, again, everything actually connected to land between North and South America. Again, this agriculture shifted to the hacienda, and this is where the colonizers claimed thousands or more acres of land. Again, they didn't actually own it, of course. They just, like we'll see in North America, or like we've seen, they just claimed it. They took it. So more indigenous labor than slaves, so they weren't bringing them from Africa. They essentially used the indigenous people that they conquered, and they made them their slaves. This is a more socially driven economy, to where, again, they're supporting each other more than just mass producing, like our plantations, and producing a crop that was then exported. So there's a greater diversity of crops in this region, again, due to that altitudinal zonation, because there's so much, the mountain ranges provide such a variation in climate that lots of different crops are made, whereas on the islands, of course, the elevation is pretty limited. And these descents are mainly European and indigenous populations today, or what are the largest populations are on the mainland. And then just kind of historical Caribbean colonizers, just in case you're interested. So again, Europe included here Spain, of course the British, the Dutch, the French, and then the U.S. So the U.S. Actually has, as part of our system, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Cuba, whereas the others were established by the European countries. And that wraps up our Middle America.